This is Derek, and you're listening to Skepticality, the official podcast. Hey, this is Derek, and you're listening to Skepticality, the official podcast of Skeptic Magazine, for Tuesday, April 10th, 2012.
Skepticality. Science!
Welcome back to another episode of Skepticality, the show that brings you news and interviews with scientists and skeptics and thinkers of all stripes for the promotion of critical thinking and science. Now and then I feel bad that we only put out an episode of this show once every 2 weeks. We get email from some of you that said we should do it weekly or more often. However, our busy schedule does not allow that. Well, now and then I get the opportunity to give you longer episodes and fill with more interesting content. This will be another one of those episodes where I had that opportunity. So I'll stop with the blather and allow our good friend Tim Farley to let us know about skepticism's past and future for this time around.
Hi, this is Tim Farley of whatstheharm.net and skeptools.com, and this is Skepticism, Past and Future. This week in the past, we've got traditional mass media, but in the future, we've got crowdsourcing. Historically, skeptics have spent much time responding to unsupportable claims in the mass media. Over the years, this has included all forms of media, including newspapers, radio, film, and television. A number of these anniversaries occur in April. On April 21st, 1934, perhaps the most famous photo of the alleged Loch Ness Monster was published in the British newspaper, the Daily Mail. The so-called surgeon's photograph got wide exposure via this publication. It was years later when it was revealed to be a hoax, but by then, the damage had been done, and many believed the monster was real. On April 23, 1930, the American astrologer Evangeline Adams began a radio show that ran 3 times a week. For various reasons, popular interest in astrology had increased in the 1920s and 1930s, and it was later in 1930 that the first regular newspaper astrology columns appeared. Television came later and became a huge force in the 20th century. Of course, now we see a plague of pro-paranormal and ghost-hunting TV shows, many of which don't seem to have a lasting effect. One show that did have an effect was a TV news documentary called DPT, Vaccine Roulette, that was produced by NBC's Washington, D.C. station, WRC. It first aired April 19, 1982, and helped galvanize public reaction to issues with the DPT vaccine. In fact, it created a national vaccine scare that long predated the recent Wakefield MMR thimerosal nonsense. The documentary won an Emmy, and some believe it led directly to the creation of the U.S. National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. As feature film documentaries became increasingly popular in the 1990s, it was inevitable that pseudoscience and paranormal claims would invade this form of media. The 9/11 conspiracy theory film Loose Change was first released on April 13, 2005. Several recut versions would follow in the years after. The anti-evolution documentary Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, starring Ben Stein, was released theatrically on April 18, 2008. Mass media misinformation can be very frustrating to skeptics. The media is usually well-funded, and skeptics usually aren't. Skeptical critiques usually reach a much smaller audience than the original media. And of course, the skeptical point of view always seems less appealing and commercial. In the future of skepticism, much of the information disseminated by both skeptics and our competition will be done through the internet. This tends to democratize information production, as you no longer need a well-funded mass media backer. All you need is a computer and an internet connection. The ultimate democratization of information is a process known as crowdsourcing. This is where huge groups of loosely organized people come together to curate, collect, edit, or create information in one place. Often the result is much more valuable than the individual contributions might suggest. The best-known example of crowdsourced information is Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia that lets anyone edit it. I've been encouraging skeptics to get involved in editing Wikipedia since 2008, and Susan Gerbic launched a whole blog around it, on which she gives tips and rallies skeptics to improve certain articles. All of the tools I talked about last episode, Lanyard, Hypothesis, and Rebutter, rely on crowdsourcing to fill their databases with useful content. There are many other examples of crowdsourcing that could be very valuable to skeptical outreach. For instance, the website rating tool Web of Trust can be used by skeptics to warn the general public about misinformation, but that requires crowds of skeptics to enter ratings one at a time. FishBarrel is a tool that lets skeptics crowdsource complaints about regulatory violations by quacks. Skeptic Stack Exchange is a site designed to crowdsource good answers to questions about pseudoscience and the paranormal. And there are many, many more. So many more, in fact, that I'll be writing and talking about this subject several times this year. It's the subject of my presentation to the Madison Skeptics in Madison, Wisconsin on Saturday, April 21st, and I'm leading an entire workshop on the subject of crowdsourced skeptical activism at the Amazing Meeting on Thursday, July 15th. I hope to see you there. And this brings us to the end of another edition of Skepticism, Past and Future. As always, links to additional material are in the show notes. And follow me on Twitter or Facebook under the name Krelnik, Krelnik, for a daily fact from skepticism's past and ongoing news of skepticism's future.
Hi, I'm Brian Hogg. I'm the author of Book 1 of I'm Sorry, Apologies from God, which is the first in a short series of Kindle ebooks which detail the Christian God trying to make amends AA style for all of the ways he's been a raging dickhat since basically the first moment of creation. In addition to the straight apology, God also details for the very first time his own history, including the moment of his creation, the context of his creation, his early years, in sort of vast timeless stretch of time before making the Big Bang happen, and why exactly he hates his favorite creation, us, so very, very much. Because if there is one takeaway from the Bible, aside from the fact that God is clearly a dick, it is that despite all of the bluster about him loving us so very much and us being his most favorite ever thing, he clearly has it in for us and really hates us. So for everyone who loves God, hates God, or wants to understand him better, I think this is the book for you. Because if you love him, if you are a New Testament loving Christian, or I guess a New Testament loving person of any stripe, do even more of God just being nice and happy because he's been wrong. He realizes he's been wrong and he's trying to make it better. Please, won't you let him make it better? If you hate God, basically the same thing I just said applies. And if you want to understand more about him, then, well, friend, this book fills a number of fairly large theological plot holes, such as, why does God allow evil? How does God know everything? And why did the Neanderthal go extinct? That is a very popular question. Very infrequently in the Bible, but it's a popular question. And this book, this first of this series of books, is as large a Band-Aid on the face of Christian apologetics as you're ever going to see. So if this is the kind of thing that might make you interested, if you want to spend $1.99 to get a few moments of laughter and possibly some enlightenment, go now to Amazon.com, search for the book, I'm Sorry, Apologies from God, or go to godapologizes.com. There's a direct link to the book page. I hope you check it out, and I hope you enjoy it very much. If you do, please do let me know. Thank you.
Remember what I mentioned about giving you listeners more content per episode? Well, next up is everybody's favorite keeper of skeptical reference material, Bob Carroll, with the second installment of Unnatural Virtue.
This is Bob Carroll, creator of the Skeptic's Dictionary and the blog Unnatural Acts. Welcome to another episode of Unnatural Virtue. In this and future episodes, I'll be offering some brief comments on topics in critical thinking, skepticism, and science. Today's topic is the placebo, which is a Latin word meaning "I will please." In the early 19th century, placebo meant medicine or treatment given to please the patient rather than to cure what ailed him. Today, many skeptics refer to acupuncture, homeopathy, Reiki, therapeutic touch, and the like as placebo medicine, which seems fitting since the main virtue of these treatments is that they please the patient, the practitioner, and in many cases, the hospital administrator. If they didn't please the customer, these practices would have gone the way of bloodletting. The defenders of energy medicine and homeopathy, however, think their treatments are efficacious as well as pleasing. Skeptics disagree, but some might allow that CAM, complementary and alternative medicine, may benefit some people by relaxing them and relieving them of stress. But the reduction of stress, which might be provided by science-based medical providers as well, isn't a placebo. Apparently, the practice of giving patients bread pills, water, or other similar substances is an ancient one among physicians, who gave placebos to bring comfort to the patient, but did not think that the placebos had any physiological effects. Early studies of patients given placebos indicated that these patients improved because the disease had run its course. Most illnesses and diseases, as well as most aches and pains, resolve themselves. It seems likely that physicians gave dummy pills to their patients with the knowledge that the patients would recover regardless. And it is only natural that patients who get better would think the dummy pill, the acupuncture, or the homeopathic water brought about relief, even if they'd have gotten better without the treatments. In the 19th and early 20th century, several controlled studies were done comparing groups of patients getting standard treatment to groups getting a dummy pill, referred to as a placebo, even though the purpose was not to please any patients. Some of these studies were done to find out if a vaccine or drug was efficacious. If the placebo group did as well as the experimental group, the group getting the vaccine or drug, then any benefit to the experimental group could be attributed to other things, rather than to the treatment. When studies began to show that subjects treated with dummy pills and subjects getting no treatment at all often fare about as well as subjects getting standard treatment or an experimental treatment, another view of the placebo emerged. It now became common to think that inert substances can produce salutary effects by the power of belief and suggestion. In 1955, Dr. Henry K. Beecher gave a talk at the annual meeting of the American Medical Association. The title of Dr. Beecher's talk was "The Powerful Placebo." He evaluated 15 clinical trials concerned with different diseases and found that 35% of the patients got their relief by a placebo alone. This paper was a game changer. Rather than see the placebo as something given to please the patient or something against which to measure the effectiveness of a medical treatment, now the placebo itself was given efficacy. Furthermore, the concept of the placebo expanded to include such things as fake ultrasound, fake surgery, sham acupuncture, and fake estrogen implants. The value of these comparison studies may have been to demonstrate the effectiveness of standard practices or to test new treatments. But when it became evident that in many cases placebo groups fared about the same as treated groups, some practitioners clung to the notion of the powerful placebo, rather than admit that their heart or knee surgery, for example, was pointless. If patients improve with or without the surgery, doesn't that show that the surgery is unnecessary? If sham acupuncture gets about the same results in pain reduction as true acupuncture, Doesn't that show that the patients would be relieved of their pain with or without the acupuncture? Not necessarily. Maybe getting treatment, real or fake, in a clinical setting with the promise of relief has a beneficial effect that someone getting no treatment at all might not receive. Research over the past decade has shown that many improvements reported or measured in controlled studies as being due to a placebo were actually due to something else, like the symptoms running their course, regression to the mean, spontaneous improvement, additional treatment, or classical conditioning, to name just a few. Research has also shown, however, that in some cases placebos seem to have measurable physiological effects. Some of these effects are in the opioid system and involve the body releasing chemicals that can reduce pain. These effects, however, may be due to conditioning or to the reduction of stress in the clinical setting, with a reassuring healer providing relief by suggesting that things will improve with the course of treatment proposed. So far, these effects have not been shown to be as powerful or as long-lasting as drugs like morphine. When you think of a healing being due to a powerful placebo or a miraculous process that science doesn't understand, think classical conditioning, natural regression, misdiagnosis, symptom fluctuation, patient politeness and subordination, additional treatment, or a host of other things. Your first inclination might be to think placebo or miracle, but first inclinations may be responses to the availability bias, which will be our topic next time. In the meantime, please commit some unnatural acts in public. And don't forget, skepticism, though unnatural, is a virtue.
Thanks again for taking the time to give us information from your vast archives over there at the Skeptic Libraries, Bob. So, 2 years ago, on April 13th, 2010, we had on our special guest for this episode. In these past 2 years, Scott Harrison has moved from his paradise home in the Cayman Islands back to the mainland of the United States. And in that time, he also came out with a new book, 50 Popular Beliefs That People Think Are True. So I figure it's a good time again to call up Guy and have a chat with him about his latest book and the new information he decided to share with the world. So, Guy, how have you been doing since last we talked?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back. I'm a big fan of the show, so I'm happy to be back with you.
And, somebody that a lot of folks probably would be jealous of because you used to live in the Caymans, but now you live back here in the mainland of the United States, even though you still live in a place that a lot of people would be jealous of.
Yeah, I went from the Cayman Islands to San Diego, so I'm doing pretty good with picking my geography spots. I'm really happy here. Love it. Family loves it.
Oh, well, that's great. Now, I have you on today to talk about your newest book, which is the 50 Popular Beliefs That People Think Are True. And I'm sensing a trend. Are you trying to make a whole bunch of books with the 50 popular something?
Yeah, well, it seems that way. I think my publisher likes it. My first book was 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God, when I sort of surveyed the most common justifications for religious belief around the world and then responded to them with skeptical analysis. And that book did very well, continues to do very well. And so this one is sort of, has that kind of 50 theme to it, but it's a lot different. I mean, it has some religious stuff in it. I do address things like faith healing, prayer, that stuff, but it's a real grand tour of extraordinary claims, weird beliefs, everything. It's all in there. I mean, I put psychics, UFOs, alien abductions, Roswell, haunted houses. I visited the most haunted house in America. I pretended to be a psychic, very successfully, by the way. Got intelligent design, creationism, moon hoax, and some things that you usually wouldn't find in most skeptic-type books like this. I put in a thing about race-based medicine, race and sports. I've got a chapter on global warming, but not whether or not global warming is real or a big hoax. I've got in there something I hope both sides of that argument will look at, and I'm pointing out that this is a science issue, not a political issue. And I don't care where you're coming from, conservative, liberal, whatever, Democrat, Republican, you're completely missing the point if you allow yourself to be biased based on politics when you're addressing what should be completely a scientific issue. How you respond to it has political implications, of course, but it's a science issue. And I've got another thing in there which kind of hits on science, which is odd for me, this skeptic pro-science guy. I have a chapter about science being overrated and people putting too much faith in scientists, because I've been surprised traveling around the world. There are societies I've been to where many people put scientists up on a pedal a little bit too high, in my opinion. They think that everything they say is true and valid and should be respected without question just because they're scientists. And of course, I mean, I'm sure you know, but a lot of people don't. That's just as bad as putting your trust in a faith healer or a preacher or a psychic or somebody like that. You have to question everything. And although people in positions of authority should be respected a little more than just somebody on the street. Still, just because a guy has a PhD behind his name, just because some guy works at a university, doesn't necessarily mean he knows what he's talking about. And of course, the thing about science, what makes it so great, is that it's wrong all the time. It's wrong. Hopefully, the errors are discovered and corrected, and science moves on and gets better, gets closer to reality, closer to truth. That's what's great about it. But a lot of people have forgotten that along the way. So anyway, there's a lot of little chapters in here that might surprise some people, mixed in with the Atlantis and astrology, stuff like that. But it's a fun book. It's really fun. It's fun to write, fun to research, and the reaction's been tremendous from it. Really good response.
Oh, great. Well, it was great having you on, because I think you just described everything you need to know.
Okay, have a great day. Bye. I'm going to go surfing now. See ya.
Well, yeah, I was about to say, one of the things I kind of liked about this, we have had many people on with books like, it's kind of like this, but, different flavors of it. And most of the time, they're written from the standpoint of like trying to, grab the attention of a broad audience. But the nice part about your book is one of the very first things you read in this book is you made it right off clear. This is a skeptic's book.
Oh yeah. I'm kind of a, my writing tone. I didn't consciously set out to do it, but it's just happened over the 3 books I've written so far. I'm a very hard-hitting skeptic. I mean, I really think that our species needs to wake up and live in the real world, because too many people suffer and die every day for lack of skepticism. Okay, so I'm hard-hitting about it. However, I don't think you need to beat every single person over the head with your skepticism that you encounter in daily life. You need to pick and choose the tone of your conversation, how you attack the challenge of getting people to open their eyes. So some people I might be really aggressive and rough with. Other people I'm completely gentle, and I just maybe ask a couple of leading questions and walk away, because I sense that's the best way to maybe reach them. And I've always been more interested in inspiring people to think for themselves rather than trying to tell them what to think, because who the hell am I don't have all the answers. I don't for a second pretend to be some wonderful genius that everybody should just trust and follow behind. I mean, not at all. I want everybody to think for themselves and think their own way out of this sea of madness we're all kind of treading water in, that's all around us. So I tend to be very sympathetic toward believers, because one, I'm just kind of naturally a nice guy. I want to like people and I want people to like me, but I'm also completely aware of how simply being a human makes you vulnerable to being tripped up by crazy claims and weird beliefs. Just the way our brains work make us all susceptible to this stuff. So, in most skeptics, most hardcore atheists, hardcore skeptics, if you talk to them, you say, what were you doing 20 years ago, 30 years ago when you're in childhood? And you'll find out, they believed crazy stuff too along the way. Most people just kind of think their way out of it eventually, if ever. And so no one should have a, holier than thou attitude towards anybody because of what they believe, okay? Because we've all been there. I've been there. Everybody has. And so, one thing I say is we all believe silly things, okay? All of us. What counts is how silly, how many, and how long, how much of our lives we spend believing them. That's what matters.
Well, especially in this day and age, because as we're recording this, right in the middle of the political race madness. So there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, it's, I've been watching the Republican debates, and as much as I've been involved in this kind of stuff, the attacks on science and just the ignorance about science, you would think at some point I would just get used to it and be okay. Yeah, I've seen this all before, but still, it just doesn't so much anger me as just makes me sad to think that people can be taken seriously as presidential candidates, in a country that has a nuclear arsenal of thousands of warheads and, 300 million people and all this, and produces so many PhDs and scientists and engineers, and has, a country that landed on the moon. We do all this stuff. And then you'll have a guy that is a top presidential contender who seems like he just walked out of the Middle Ages, and nobody laughs at him. Well, some people do, but nobody in his face anyway. And I'm just thinking, like, what is going on? Are we ever going to get there? I mean, fortunately, I'm optimistic. I think there's hope for us. I think we can do better, and that's what motivates me to write my books, because I'm not going to just give up and turn my back on humanity and say it's a lost cause. I mean, there's so many trends that are hopeful and encouraging that I recognize, and I tend to focus on those and think, someday we're going to get there. We're doing okay. And and people like you're doing a big thing. You're making an effort to awaken people and reach new minds and get people thinking in the right way. I mean, it's encouraging. It really is. I think there's hope for us.
I'd hope so. I mean, like you said, it's like everything else. Science moves forward by making mistakes and going, hey, how do we make sure that that's right, and how we got it wrong? And I think society does the same thing over time. I mean, just look, 300 years ago, we had to toss our poop outside the window because we didn't have a sewer system.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So, what I found right off, one of your 50 things was the most dangerous belief, which is really fun because a lot of people don't understand the history and the misuse of the IQ thing. I loved that story you had, especially with some of the examples you had. And I think there was one about a lady you knew in high school and her dealing with BGA and such. I thought was really great.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, the chapter is about most people, I would think, have this feeling that you're just born smart or you're not. You're a smart person and you're off you go to grad school, or you're not really, and it's off you go to bricklaying or, working at a cashier somewhere. And the thing is, while completely acknowledge, of course, there are genetic or innate gifts that some people have that the others may not have when it comes to intelligence. But here's the thing, we can't identify them in childhood. You cannot. You can't show me a 5-year-old child, excluding severe disabilities, of course, but you just can't show me a child at 5 and say, okay, that kid will be a cosmologist one day, and then point to another kid sitting next to him and say, and that child will be a taxi cab driver. Although that's a bad example because taxi cab drivers actually require a lot of higher brain functioning, especially in London. But I make the point in the chapter that, look, you can only know about somebody's potential after they've achieved something. You don't know. You cannot know. Because what we're learning now about genetics is just mind-blowing. I mean, it really is. And I find it kind of inspirational in a way, especially if I was young. If I was a child now, it's great because we're finding out that the genes are not as simple as we thought. It's not a matter of, oh, you've got the good genes. You're going to be a quarterback in the NFL, you're going to be a genius. No, not at all. It depends on how they interact with the environment, and that interaction is so complex. It's just you could not possibly track it or really control it in many ways. The best you can do is give a child motivation, stimulation, and opportunity, and hope for the best and see what happens. And that's what we should be doing for all children in the world. We should be giving them all just every opportunity, all the stimulation and motivation they need to be the best they can, because we really don't know what their best can be until their life is said and done. You don't know. One example I give is, imagine if I showed you on a street corner a massive 250-pound bodybuilder who is just ripped, just shredded, okay? Looked like he just stepped off the Mr. Olympia stage. Right next to him is some withered, shriveled up little guy who can barely stand up. He's holding a cane, he's leaning. Now you'd look right there and, 100 out of 100 people would say, well, the muscular man is obviously, he had better genetics for bodybuilding. The guy next to him, clearly didn't. But that would be silly. That'd be ridiculous, because you don't know. Maybe the skinny guy was never exposed to weight training at an early age, or he was but had no interest in it, or he was turned off by it because of a bad experience, or he trained wrong. He had poor instruction. He completely trained wrong. He had an injury and gave it up. Who knows? Who knows? He might have had, but the point is, he might have had superior genetics than the guy standing next to him who was massive and muscular. And the same exact thing, that's a visual example you can see, but you can say the same exact thing about an astronomer standing next to a janitor. You cannot say, well, that astronomer was clearly destined from the womb to think about the stars and space travel and nebula and galaxies. No, not at all. You can't make any assumption of genetic superiority, because you just do not know what stimulated certain genes and what failed to stimulate certain genes, and what combination and what time. I mean, nutrition, all kinds of things play into it. So it's really a complex thing. And I don't think anyone should ever, and I've been guilty of this in my life. Right in this chapter, I thought about examples where I have excused myself from maybe attempting things or achieving things, thinking, well, I just didn't have it in me, and it's like blame your parents or something, and that's crazy, I mean, we should all have our dreams, aspire to what we want to, give it our best shot, and if it doesn't work out, it's okay. That's part of life too. It's no problem in failing, but try. But never fail to try because you feared you didn't have the genetic, attributes required for it. That's just not acceptable according to current science.
Oh, it's funny because you even mentioned in there that you said something, I think, to a child that you knew, or one of your kids maybe, where you mentioned that,
the quarterback thing.
Yeah.
I gave
example.
Brief example. I was watching the Super Bowl with my son, and we were talking about the quarterback, and I was explaining the position to he spent his first few years, about 10 years of life in the Cayman Islands, so he probably didn't know as much about American football as he would have if he had grown up here. And so we're playing catch up, and I'm explaining to him the demands on an athlete to be an NFL quarterback. It's just an extremely difficult position, across any sport. It's really hard because you've got to make accurate passes, you've got to read defenses in split seconds, and you have to do it all while 250, 300-pound defensive linemen are charging at you full speed with the hopes of, decapitating you. So it's an extremely complex, demanding, scary position to play. And then he said something like, why didn't you try to play in the NFL? And I laughed and said, oh yeah, I could have done it, sure, if I'd been born with perfect vision, a rocket arm, laser sighting, and if I had maybe another 5 inches of height and another 30 pounds of muscle on me, sure, I could have done it. And then I thought about it. What I was doing, I was mocking my genetics. I just instinctively, reflexively, I shifted the blame for me for I never even tried to play that position. I never played football. I never attempted it, okay? But I didn't say that. I didn't respond to him by saying, well, who knows? Maybe I would have been an NFL quarterback. I never tried. Wow, who knows? Instead, I immediately played the gene card and said, "Oh yeah, if I hadn't had such mediocre genetics, sure, I might have been one. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad." So that was, and it dawned on me later that I had done that just as a reflex, and it's wrong. I shouldn't have done it, because if I had, from the age of say 6, just become obsessed with the NFL and had posters of Joe Montana in my bedroom, and I trained every day and lifted weights, every chance I could get. And I went to summer football camps, and I played for my high school football team, and I just obsessed with it and ate right and did all this kind of stuff and got lucky and had a good coach and was on a good team and had the right breaks, maybe I could have made it. Now, I doubt it, because the odds are it's such a long shot for anyone. I doubt I would have made it. But who knows? Maybe I would have. That's the point. You don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah, and the same thing applied, as you said in the chapter. It goes to other things too, like IQ, and the history of IQ actually makes that pretty clear that we even use that completely wrong now anyway.
Yeah, I've talked to psychologists about this, and it shocked me the more I researched this, because although there are intelligence tests which can be good predictors of specific things in life, like your performance at college, maybe if you score a certain way on an SAT, that could be an indication that you'll probably make it in college. I don't deny that at all. Of course, that's fine. Or this kind of job, if you score this way on a certain test, you may succeed in this sort of job, but not this kind of job. That's right. But to think you can hand somebody, particularly a child, some kind of a test, and you can put a finite specific number on something called their intelligence, which no matter how many proponents of IQ tests will, they'll put asterisks here and they'll define it this way and say, yes, but of course, but you have to consider this. And they put all these qualifiers on it. But in the general public, when you put a number next to a child and say that's their IQ, it's obvious what you're saying. You're saying this is pretty much them. That's their brain power right there. And that's just, there's so many things wrong with that. For one, to be tested on a given day, or even 1 or 2, 3 days. I mean, how do you know that's not a bad month for that kid? How do you know? It's like if I have, I banged my foot on a door, and then tomorrow I've got a bruise on my foot, but I'm going to be tested in the 100-meter dash, and I'm going to be timed. And I'm timed with my sore foot. And that's it. That's a measure of my speed, and that, is put into my file. I mean, that's crazy. Maybe I was sleepy that day. Who knows? Maybe I didn't care. Maybe I ate too much the month before and my time was affected. I mean, there's so many problems with it, and just the outrageous crimes that have been committed in the name of IQ tests throughout history, especially when it comes to race. Oh my gosh, it's just amazing when you look at the cultural bias in these tests. I mean, people with a straight face would hand black Americans in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they would hand them tests asking them questions about an oboe would have strings, or do you play it with a mallet, and you select one, and they would hand that to some sharecropper black guy from South Carolina. And because he doesn't know how to play an oboe or something, somehow that means he's got genetically limited brain power, which also extrapolates to his entire cultural group or race. I mean, it's insane, absolutely ridiculous.
Well, it shows if that was a good measure, then using the man on the street interviews by people like Jay Leno means that most white Americans are pretty dumb.
Yeah, that's scary. That is scary. Yeah.
Same idea.
So much of that is just impacted by knowledge, education, motivation. I mean, it's just it is really, 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 really dangerous and fraught with problems when you start to draw heavy implications from a test like that. And when you start to say, okay, well, he's a male and he scored like this, therefore men are smarter than women, or in this area, or less intelligent than women in this regard. That's dangerous territory. When you start saying, okay, Asians score better. I have a thing I wrote about in my book Race and Reality about Asians in America. They perform so well, in schools, and wow, they're fantastic. Obviously, they're genetically superior, right? They've got some kind of DNA gift, right? No, well, what's interesting? There are many studies which show that, guess what? Asian Americans tend to have more family support when it comes to education, and they study significantly more, many more hours than do white Americans, black Americans, Hispanic Americans. Okay, so isn't that fascinating? So the people who score better on the tests study more. Wow, amazing. And the thing is, and I mentioned sports is similar with black people in basketball. It's a common belief in America right now that black men are somehow just naturally gifted to play basketball better than any people on earth and all. Well, that's interesting, because if that's true, then why the hell do they have to work at it so hard? Because guys like Magic Johnson and all, they didn't just roll out of the crib and become great basketball players at the age of 15 or 16. No. Guys like Magic Johnson started playing obsessively from the age of about 6, okay, every day for hours and hours. Michael Jordan, okay, the greatest basketball player ever. Does that all come down to his genes? I don't think so. Because guess what? He was widely known during his playing days as the hardest working player in the NBA. Now, why did he have to train so hard if he was just some gifted prodigy who had to just show up and win? I mean, and Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, talk to anybody about their singing ability, and they'll say, oh, yes, blessed. They were just born to sing. Really? Michael Jackson was beaten by his father and forced to practice 5 hours a day from the age of about, 4 or 5, for years and years and years. Mozart, there's so many examples of what we view in popular culture as we attribute to genetic gifts straight out of the birth canal that that people just have by magic or supernatural or from God or whatever. But then actually we're ignoring the reality of their life stories.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think that most of the time people default to that probably because it makes them feel better.
Yep. Yeah, it's an excuse. It's a way out. Like why at this stage in my life, why do I only have 3 published books? Why have I not published 20? Well, you know what? Maybe 3 is the best I can do with the tools I have. I'm doing okay for what I am. That kind of excuses me from working 7 days a week and staying up late. Because
you're just lazy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, probably that's the reality. I could have had if I'd work harder, but yeah, you're exactly right, Derek. It's a way out. If you train hard and you don't make the Olympics, you can always say, well, probably mom and dad are to blame. And maybe they are, but you can't really ever know that because there's just too many factors.
Yeah, and it's funny thing is, I think you about midway through the book, maybe a little bit early on, you restate the fact that almost all the skeptics I know agree on, we've all heard it many times, that if you show the evidence for X, please show it to me because we all wanted to see it. And most of the things you mentioned in this book are things that people believe, and even if you ask them, they don't care if you have evidence against it or not. They just say, well, because it's that way, but you're like, show me the evidence, and people don't want to do that.
Yeah, it's weird. That is one thing that really frustrates me more than anything, is when you encounter this mindset that many people have where they don't care. It seems they don't care if they're wrong. They're not loyal to reality or truth. They're loyal to just holding a position, holding a belief. And to me, that's just insane. I mean, because there is nothing that I'm not willing to let go of if somebody shows me that I'm wrong. You understand? If somebody comes up and says, hey, wow, guess what? Darwin blew it. Evolution is not right. Completely wrong. Here's the evidence. Wow, everything was wrong. Okay, bye evidence. I mean, bye evolution. See you later. I'm not, in fact, I would embrace that. Like, I don't think that every blinking light in the sky, every UFO is an alien spaceship. I just don't believe that. I'm not convinced of it. There's no good evidence for it. But guess what? If one of them turns out to be an alien spaceship, I'm not going to cry because I held the wrong position all these years. No, I'll be happy. I will be excited. That's great news. I'll learn something new. So I'm willing to change in a heartbeat if the proper evidence comes along, the proper proof. But so many people are just stubborn to a point of being, it's almost embarrassing. I just don't understand why people would want to do that. And it happens a lot with religion where people do not want to even question it. And I ask them, well, hold on, if you think you've got the truth here, if you think you know what's right and what's real, then why would you be concerned about thinking about it? Why would you be hesitant to challenge it? if it's real, it's going to stand up to it. So I don't know. That's a frustrating thing. And that one thing I do in this book is I try, rather than just debunk a bunch of crazy claims and leave it at that, I try to give a lot of ammunition to skeptics who might read this book, because I don't think, like, if you're at a cocktail party or you're hanging out with your friends or whatever, I don't think it's enough if somebody brings up the Roswell spaceship crash, or if somebody brings up astrology. It's not enough to go, oh, no good evidence, that's it, psh, junk, don't believe it. That's not enough. That's not enough. You need to tell them something about Project Mogul, what was going on back then that might have led people to believe there was a spaceship that crashed there. What was the government actually? There was a government cover up there. It wasn't a spaceship, but something was going on. I talk about that in the book. Now, how can you just tell somebody? I don't like it if a skeptic says to a believer, oh, that's just crazy, you're stupid to believe that, and walks away, because you're just, that's nothing. That you've come across as just some shallow, negative person who doesn't have anything to offer. So you need some ammunition, and that's why each chapter in this book gives a ton of ammunition on each of these subjects, so that you can not necessarily win an argument, but you can give believers a lot to think about. Because a lot of times you don't convert anybody in one encounter. What I think happens, and what I've tried to do in my life, is just plant seeds of doubt and just help people appreciate the power of skepticism and how good it is, how constructive it is, and give them just little nuggets of insight and little nagging questions you can stick in their head, so they walk away and those things fester, and it might take years, who knows. They eventually may come around and be better off for it, and be thankful for it.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned in here that one of the reasons why most misbelieved things can be attributed to people thinking badly about memory, and all the research we've done in memory, thinking that it's something like a video camera. Mainly, I think, because of like TV and movies, but people think our memory works that way, and it really isn't. And you had the example with a little old man.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Memory. There's actually a study, some researchers did a survey, and they found that the vast majority of Americans think that our memory operates like a video camera. We've got some sort of DVD playback system in our skulls that we recall memories like that. It could not be further from the truth. I've actually got comments from Elizabeth Loftus, probably the top memory researcher in the world, and I looked into the whole thing about memory, because I think it has a lot to do with weird beliefs. I mean, a lot of these things surely come down to just screwed up memories that people have of things they saw, heard, experienced, yesterday or years ago. And the thing is, once you understand how our memory actually works, it's actually scary, because you cannot trust your own memories. I mean, no matter how real they seem, no matter how accurate they feel to you, you cannot trust them, because here's why. Because our memories are constructive and associative. The example of what you brought up, the example I give in the book to try to make the science easy to understand for anyone. The way memory works, okay, say I want to remember something from my childhood, right? I want to remember the first girl I ever kissed in 3rd grade, all right? And I think back to her name, Kimberly was her name, right? Here comes the memory, it's flooding forward. Well, guess what? I didn't push a play button on a DVD player inside my skull, okay? What I had to do, it's like this. I had to tap this little old codger, this little old guy who lives in my head, okay? He's sitting around a campfire somewhere inside my head. I have to tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, tell me about Kimberly, that time I kissed her in the 3rd grade. And he goes, okay. And then he tells me a story. He tells me a story, a tale about the time Guy kissed Kimberly in the 3rd grade, okay? Now, like any storyteller, he edits, he leaves out parts that he thinks are not important. He might add something that might make it a little more interesting. He might accidentally, by mistake or because he feels it'll be more efficient, he might reshuffle it a bit so that things that happen first come later in the story, things that happen later come first in the story, and some things may just be jettisoned because he thinks I don't need to know them. and this is how our memory works. It's unbelievable. And what's even worse is that say next week I say I want to remember when I kissed Kimberly in the 3rd grade. I want to remember that again. Okay, I tap the old guy on the shoulder. He doesn't read from the script of that story he told me last week. No, no, no. He tells me the story again, okay? And this time he'll tell it a little bit different probably than he told me last week. And if I ask it a month from now, he's going to tell it a little bit different. It just changes over time, you know? That's your memory. It's unbelievable. And this has been proven over and over and over that our memories cannot be trusted. For example, even what's called flashbulb memories, these real dramatic moments, you know, like where were you when JFK was shot? You know, where were you when 9/11 happened, the morning the towers fell? What were you doing? And people say, oh, yeah, I'll never forget that moment. Yeah, when I saw CNN, the towers, and oh my gosh, the planes hit. Oh, it was terrible. I remember who I was with, what I was wearing, where I was standing. I'll never forget that moment, you know. Well, guess what? Most people get it all wrong because psychologists they know now how to test for these. It's a simple thing. They'll hand out a little form to all their students the day after 9/11. They'll say, write down, you know, a couple of paragraphs where you were on 9/11 when you heard the news, when you heard that New York and Washington D.C. had been attacked by hijacked planes. Describe who you're with, what you're wearing, how you felt, blah, blah, blah. And they write it down. And then 5 years later, they'll contact the same kids, the same students, have them again write down their memories of that day. Guess what? They'll remember, half of them will say they were in a completely different place. Whereas first they said I was in a dorm room, which is probably more accurate because they're writing about something the next day. But then 5 years later, they say, yeah, I was at home, I'll never forget it, or I was at a restaurant with my best friend. Completely different. Or they'll say, yes, I was with my mother, it was such a dramatic. And what's happening is they're mixing up memories. They may remember something that was 2 days after 9/11 when they were with one friend, but actually on the day of 9/11 they were with a girlfriend, and then, you know, 3 days later they were with their father, and they get it all jumbled up. And this is how it works. And this has huge implications for when people say, I saw Bigfoot on my camping trip, and man, he was tall, and I saw the hair, and I could see his eyes, and the silhouette was perfect. And then you've also got the problem of suggestibility. You know, if you think about things, okay, there's a good possibility you're going to remember those things, whether those things were there or not, okay? Because it's easy to contaminate memories. Easy. I could go on and on about this. Don't let me ramble, Derek. Interrupt any time, okay? This stuff just fascinates me. I mean, in fact, I'll say one real quick thing. While writing the chapter that touched on memory, believe it or not, it was perfect timing. It happened to me. I was driving in my car listening to ESPN radio or something like that, and the host said something about Pete Rose's hit streak, that he was threatening to break Joe DiMaggio's hit streak record or something like that. And then he said the date that it happened, and it was something like, I can't remember, I think it was 1977. And then I thought, he screwed that up. There's no way, that's wrong. Because as he was talking about Pete Rose's hit streak that year, he failed, by the way, he didn't make it. But I remembered I could see myself in my dorm room in college with a friend when Pete Rose was coming up to bat and he finally got out and ended the streak. I remember being with a friend in my dorm room, and it couldn't have possibly been in the 70s because I didn't go to college till the late 80s. So I'm thinking, well, he blew that, you know, he just made a mistake, you know. But then it nagged me for a bit, and I thought, wow, you know, I looked it up, and sure enough, the ESPN guy was correct. That happened in the 70s. And my memory, and the only thing I was thinking, well, how in the world could I remember that? And I still can kind of see it in my head that I was in a dorm room when Pete Rose was on TV coming up to bat, ended the hit streak, but it's absolutely impossible. It could not have happened. And then I'm thinking, what? Maybe a replay, or there was something on the background, and, you know, when I was someday in my dorm room, I don't know how my head and my brain made some association between being in college in a dorm and Pete Rose's hit streak. Is bizarre. I still have no idea how that happened. But the fact is, I was confident. Like, I might have bet somebody $100 that I knew what I was talking about, that happened in the late 80s, but it didn't. You know, so that was, for me, that was a powerful example of how you have to be very careful with memory. And, you know, just last year, the New Jersey Supreme Court came out with a big big decision when they said that eyewitness accounts are just not good enough in murder cases. You have to have more.
I was so glad when I saw that.
Yeah, and that's great, because innocent people surely have been sent to prison in this country, many times because of eyewitness accounts. And the thing is, honest people with perfect eyesight, very healthy brains, sane, intelligent, they can and do make major mistakes in their memory all the time, and we cannot trust it. And we need to really revamp the entire legal system across America and around the world, because it's just too risky. We cannot send people to prison based on the word of somebody who's remembering something they saw, usually 6 months ago by the time it comes to trial. And all. It's just, and the people may be absolutely confident, yes, I saw this guy down at the end of an alley and he shot so and so, but the fact is, you just cannot trust it. And many tests have confirmed this. I mean, scientists have shown over and over and over that you just can't rely on what people see and remember seeing.
I remember that when that kind of happened with me, because I had to think about it critically when I woke up from my coma after my stroke. I thought, well, I was in a coma, and you have all those stories about what you heard when you were in a coma, and all these tales of, like, I remember when these people were talking and things, and I thought when I first woke up, I heard music and such, and I mentioned all this, and it was like, well, one of my best friends was actually in the hospital almost every day because he was reading a book, so he sat there listening to music, and I remember music. I remember somebody singing, and the people did to sing, and it's like, oh, see, I remembered all that. And then because of who I am, I said, but this doesn't make any sense, because I was completely out, and it doesn't make any sense. And so I thought about it a bit more, and after talking to people, and I found out later on that, well, they took me off my the chemical that keeps you under to keep you in a coma, and I didn't wake up right away. They weren't sure I was going to wake up, and I was like that for almost like 2 weeks, where I didn't have the stuff in me. So I was probably coming out for a very long time, and all the things I remembered when I talked to people, there were things that happened in that last week before I woke up. I was like, oh, I was waking up, because then I realized all those memories were stuff that when I was actually in that time where you're waking up from sleep, and all that stuff all happened within like a day.
Wow.
And I thought all these things must have happened over the course of like 2 months. No, it was all this stuff that I remember from the last like few hours of my time being in a coma.
Wow.
And I thought about that more and said, how many times do people make those same statements, and then they just get convinced, and other people just assume that means everybody that's in a coma is listening to all this stuff that's going on? They're probably not.
Yeah.
Because
And you can, when you remember something, you can convince yourself that that's a valid memory, and it becomes valid in your mind, like it absolutely really happened. I mean, you can't trust anything. I mean, I'm telling you, keep a journal. If you want to have accurate memories, I encourage everybody to keep a journal, write stuff down immediately, take photos.
I think that's kind of one of the fun things that's happened since the mid to late 90s until now is so many people blog.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be helpful going forward for some people to like look back at what they wrote about like years ago.
Well, I bet many people will be shocked, and they will be convinced that someone hacked in and rewrote things, entries from 10 years ago. They will be stunned and say, that never happened. I never wrote that. No, it can't be.
Swoopy actually blogged like once, twice, 3 times a day when I was in the hospital in a coma, and she wrote down the stuff that was going on with me publicly on a blog, and I copied that to my own website so you can actually go and read that all, and it has like all this details about the day that the moment I got put in the hospital until I woke up, and it's all there, and she made sure that I kept that, because now we can actually go back, and especially when new doctors say, well, what happened? Well, we have this and that. Here, just go to this website, go to this link.
Yeah, that's good.
But the fun part is they love that, because she even has the details in there about like the medical procedures they were doing on me and all that. So there's no
That's excellent.
there's no vocal mistake of the memory. It's just, here it is. It was all as it happened,
Yeah.
within like in an hour, since an hour from it happened, as it happened. So it was kind of nice to do that for this reason, because
Right.
how many times does a doctor say, what happened to you?
Yep.
And how many times do you get it wrong?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. I should add that we're talking about how, crazy our brains are and all in a negative way, really, as far as it comes to assessing reality and, paranormal stuff and all this kind. But you should say that in most of our daily life, the way our brains work is great. I mean, we don't want to remember every single detail of everything. If we called up a memory and we were just flooded with information, if as far as vision, our brains kind of tell us what we see. We're not really seeing it. We're getting an interpretation with our brain, and our brain fills in visual gaps and leaves out stuff that is somehow deemed unimportant or unnecessary. But all that stuff is good in daily life. I mean, we wouldn't be able to make it out the front door and do anything if our brains didn't function the way they function.
No.
So it's not, I don't mean to condemn the poor human brain here by pointing out how fallible our memories are and all that.
Well, it's like evolution. Our brains evolved to the point where it was good enough so we could survive.
Yeah.
And like the thing about what you just said about how we survive from day to day, how many times do you ever think about the fact that when you get in a car, you're basically sitting on a love seat with like a thin little shell of aluminum, like your can, surrounding you, and you're going at 70 miles per hour every day.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Crazy.
if you actually thought about that for a moment, you're whizzing down a highway with other people doing the same thing. All we're doing is sitting there on four wheels on a piece of metal on a love seat, and that's it.
Yeah.
And we're crazy for doing it.
Yeah, if we really stopped and thought about the laws of physics and how fragile our bodies really are, I don't think we'd ever drive faster than 20 miles an hour, Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
You're right.
It's insane. And you just pointed out the same thing. It's like your brain is that good, because if our brain didn't work that well, we wouldn't survive very long. We wouldn't have jobs.
Yeah.
We wouldn't leave the house.
Yeah.
Nobody would ever travel.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there are people who remember like everything they do, these weird cases, and yet those people, they don't, become presidents or the richest people in the world. They don't end up really becoming high achievers. You would think, wow, if you could remember every detail of everything, you would conquer the world, but it doesn't really happen that way. In fact, many of them say it's just a burden. It's not fun. It's a problem.
A lot of them seem socially awkward because they end up being shut-ins and things because of that reason.
Yeah. It's that's so there's a reason for the way we are.
Now, I think that when I got done with this book, I realized that many of the stories in here, you actually mention in the little stories that you talk to some of the major names in skepticism and science, and how much time did it take to talk to all these people? It must have taken a lot of research, because you have Phil Plait and a lot of
he wrote the forward. I should thank him. He wrote the forward as well.
Yeah, he did.
He's really very supportive. I talked to a lot of people, but it's it's fun. I mean, it wasn't hard work. I'd say maybe, well, you know what? Technically, a year went into this book, but the honest answer would be a lifetime, because I've sort of been a curious person all my life, and I've been a skeptic since I was about 10 or 11 years old and started asking awkward questions in Sunday school and stuff like that, So I've been a skeptic for a long time. So a lot of this is life experience. For example, I share the story of how I was hoodwinked as a child when I watched a documentary based on Von Donigan's Chariots of the Gods.
Oh,
and I was a little kid. I saw it, and I was blown away. I thought, oh, my gosh. I was probably 10 years old or something. And I saw it, and I said, wow, this is amazing. You mean aliens visited the Earth a long time ago, and they helped build pyramids? Oh, my gosh. And then I remember going to my school library. I found the book, and I can't remember if I read it, but I remember flipping through it. Remember, do I? Did I really do that, or am I fantasizing about it? But anyway, I think I did it. And I remember looking at pictures in the book of the Nazca lines and this kind of stuff, and I was blown away. But then shortly after that, Nova had this episode where they, they completely just shredded all the claims. I mean, it was just fantastic. They went through, point by point by point, and I watched that, and here I am, this kid, and it was just it was a real eye-opening experience. I thought, well, hold on, you mean everybody on TV is not necessarily intelligent and telling the truth? Wow, that's a new concept, and you mean, wow, just because some guy says he's an archaeologist doesn't necessarily mean he's like a good archaeologist or an honest archaeologist. Wow, interesting. And so it really, I'm not saying I instantly became a hardcore skeptic, but that was one little nudge along the path towards, wanting to live in the real world my whole life. And it's also kind of, I think, that experience left me a little what's the word? I guess protective of other of kids, because I used to teach science at a school for like first grade through fifth grade, and I would get so irritated when these brilliant kids would run up to me and say, "Hey, I saw this thing on TV last night on the History Channel, and they say there's aliens living in Atlantis, down in the, right near us." This is when I was in the Caribbean. And I'd say, "Oh, no," and I'd have to like bite my tongue not to, start using bad words and get in trouble or something. And I always made it a point not to tell the kids, "No, that person's an idiot. That's stupid. Listen to me, what I'm saying. That's not true." Because then, I don't want them to not believe some goofball on TV, but believe me, because where does that get them, So I would try to tell them, you need to ask yourself, why should I believe that? That's an amazing claim. What's their evidence? And how do I know it wasn't kind of spun in a certain way on TV? And just because they show some cool graphics, anybody can do that on a computer. That doesn't mean it's really there. And I say, isn't it funny that such an amazing thing is going on out right near us in the middle of the ocean, and yet the U.S. Navy doesn't know anything about it, and nobody's really, why isn't this stuff in museums? And just ask questions, because, always, and I encourage skeptics to always do this, especially with kids, inspire them to think for themselves. Don't teach them what to think, and don't load them up with facts. Just get them asking questions and thinking, and not being afraid to say, "I don't know," if the facts are not available. Because that's what I've done to my children. And I see it's already kind of blossomed in a way, because I see my kids now. I never told them. I never said, be wary of religion. It's all crackpots. I never said that to them. I never said psychics are a bunch of con artists. Kids, don't go near them. Astrology is for idiots. I never did that. Never had that lecture with them, that talk with them. But what I did do is point out why skepticism is important. I taught them critical thinking skills, how to question and see through crazy claims. I just did that. And I told them, you're going to be faced with countless encounters throughout your life with stuff that is just not true, and people are going to want money from you. They're going to want your time. They're going to want your loyalty. They might want you to risk your health for things they're telling you, and you got to make sure you got to do the best you can to sort out the sense from nonsense. And I'm so proud and so happy to see them now. If, say, something comes on, some infomercial comes on TV when we're sitting around the living room, selling some idiotic, bracelet that makes you more balanced or something, and they watch it, and I don't say a word, and yet they'll just immediately go, what a bunch of garbage. How prove that? Whereas, how do they prove, just because it's there and the guy's pushing on this lady doesn't mean it really works? And they start asking these questions, and it makes me so happy, because I think I've done them a good service by, preparing them to go out into the world and face all this craziness. And because you never know, you can't tell a child, don't become a Hare Krishna, don't follow, don't give your money to Scientology or something, because you know what, the list is too long. You just can't go down the list of everything. All you can do is hopefully teach them how to think clearly, and then they'll be ready for battle. That's what you got to do.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, it's like teaching. Don't. What is it they say? Don't give them a fish. Teach them how to fish. Right. Well, don't give them a brain. Don't give them knowledge. Teach them how to get their own knowledge.
How to think.
Yeah. Exactly.
So tell people where they can find your book, stuff about you, like your website, things like that.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, the book's everywhere. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookstores everywhere. I mean, it's distributed widely. Once again, 50 popular beliefs that people think are true. It's published by Prometheus Books, and it's a grand tour of just about every crazy claim and weird belief you can imagine. It's all in there, and it's not a book filled with a bunch of my lectures and condescending, screaming at believers. Nothing like that at all. It's just it shows why all these claims should be doubted and should be questioned, and why everybody should really have a long hard think before jumping on board with them. And at the end of each chapter, I offer a lot of resources, books, websites, that kind of stuff, documentaries that people can look into further to learn more about each specific topic. And it's I think it would be of help to many believers, but also skeptics. Like I said earlier, I think it provides a lot of ammunition, handy ammunition. The chapters are short, so you can just flip around, read chapters that interest you, or refer to them. If you have a friend that says, there's something to ESP, well, okay, I got a chapter on that. Or if somebody says, I think that this 2012 thing, there's something to it. Well, no, there's not, and here's why. And I've got it all laid out there, real easy to read format, so you can go back and actually give them a lot to think about on these topics, so that hopefully they'll get their thinking on track. My website is guypharrison.com, and I'm on Facebook and Twitter, so find me, talk to me.
Great. Thank you so much for jumping on the show.
Oh, Derek, it's a pleasure, man. I'm a big fan of your work. You and your beloved Swoopy, you guys are great, and keep up the great work. The world needs you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, this is Austin Harper in Wichita, Kansas, calling to get the word out about the Skeptics of Oz conference being hosted by the Wichita Coalition of Reason on April 21st and 22nd at the Forum Theater here in Wichita, Kansas. We'll be having 9 speakers giving talks on science, skepticism, and atheism over the course of the weekend. Admission is free, and for more information, please visit us at skepticsofoz.org.
As usual, we have links to Guy's newest book in the show notes for this episode, and also in the bookstore link on the Skepticality website. Last episode, we had on the mistress of all things creepy and crawly, Bug Girl. We asked all of you to send her questions you might have about the wonderful world of bugs and insects via Twitter. At least 1 or 2 of you did. So I grabbed some of her time so she could answer those questions and to clear up burning question from last episode about the religious nature of one bug species. So it's been a couple weeks and I have back Bug Girl. Are you very buggy today?
Yes, because it's spring.
Yes.
In spring, all of us creatures that set our temperature by the outdoor environment get a lot more lively.
So, you had somebody sent you questions?
Yes, well, I wanted to first follow up. We talked about the praying mantis and whether it was P-R-A-Y or P-R-E-Y, and I, of course, admitted to being an accommodationist and said it really didn't matter which way you spelled it. But I did go and look it up just because it made me curious. And it turns out the correct, approved, official spelling is, in fact, P-R-A-Y-I-N-G.
So they do have a deity.
They do. And in fact, the species name for the first mantis species that was named is Mantis religiosa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is that blatant?
And they were named by Linnaeus in 1758, who was basically one of the first big original taxonomists. And so there's a lot of history behind the name that I'd completely forgotten about.
I never knew. I mean, I had heard the old thing about, is it, praying or, going to get you praying. So I never knew.
But yeah, it was clearly meant to be religious.
Wow. Well, they do look like they're doing it, so.
Yes. And then the interesting thing is, Linnaeus was obviously working in Europe, and so he named the European mantis. Most of the mantids that you see in the United States are actually not native species. Both the Chinese mantis and the European mantis have been introduced, and they're considerably larger than most of our American mantid species and are the most common ones that you're going to run into.
Yeah, somebody sent me a picture of one who lives in Hong Kong, and it was huge.
The Chinese mantas are quite large. I've seen them up to probably about 5 inches or so.
Wow.
And then there are some even larger ones in the tropics that will take birds and frogs, pretty much anything they can grab, they will eat.
Wait a minute, they're big enough to take like a bird or a frog?
A small bird.
Oh, I'd still. I'm glad I don't have those here. My wife would go crazy. It's like those giant cockroaches in Vegas I saw. Usually got in my pool. They're about the size of a credit card.
Yeah, those are actually normal sized. You may not want to go to South America. Just saying, because the ones we have here in the U.S. are kind of puny.
Yes, I know. I live in the South. We do have those little tiny baby ones.
So, although I will tell you that they get cuter the bigger they get.
Okay.
All right. Well, just take my word for that.
Only a face the bug girl would love?
No, they a lot of them have spots. They have stripes. They're very interesting.
Yeah, somebody sent me a picture of one of these giant. It looked like a locust in a way, but it was huge, like the size of like somebody's hand.
Yep.
It was big, and it was like you can make it a pet.
Yeah, you can actually. I've had pet roaches before.
That's different.
A lot of people keep different roaches as pets. Although the one drawback is roaches are, of all the insects, probably the most farty. And so they do have kind of a distinct odor.
Now that's something I never. Well, because ladybugs do the same thing.
It's different though. The ladybugs is not actually flatulence. It's actually it's a protective chemical.
Oh, okay.
That gives them that smell. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I one time got to smell a whole nest. No, I wouldn't say a nest, but a whole gathering of ladybugs in somebody's house, and it's like, what is that smell? It's like the ladybugs. It's like they're cute, but whoa, they have a smell.
Yeah, and many of them, and actually a lot of other insects do this as well. They have very strong smelling chemicals in their body, and when you pick them up, if they're disturbed, they'll do what's called reflexive bleeding, where basically they just start automatically bleeding out of all their joints, which is gross and smells bad, and so usually that makes the predator drop them in disgust.
Well, there you go. One more reason to give my wife to not like the bugs anymore.
Well, couldn't you see it as, wow, what an amazing innovation, and thank goodness we don't all bleed out of our joints?
Well, that's true.
We're upset, because that would, for one thing, it would make your workplace really messy.
It would be.
Every time you got upset, you started bleeding out of all your joints.
No, that would be bad. I don't want that. I don't want that reaction.
Although it would make committee meetings much more interesting.
Flinching is bad enough.
So that was my one follow-up. The other thing I got a lot of questions about, it was a huge week for insect news, actually. And the one thing I got the most questions about was actually, is there really insects, or are there really insects in Starbucks Frappuccinos? And then also, are there really insects in chocolate? Was sort of the follow-up question to that.
Okay, and the answer is?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, there are. And so the Starbucks thing was a whole big kerfuffle. Essentially, they made something called a soy strawberry frappuccino. And it's got strawberries, so it's got a little bit of red food coloring in it. And they changed the source of the red food coloring. And they changed the labels on their products, but they didn't really tell anybody else. And it turns out that their new source is actually red dye that's derived from an insect.
Okay.
And it's the cochineal insect. And these are insects that occur in Central and South America. And they've actually been cultivated for centuries. It was one of the things that the Spaniards, when they first invaded the Americas, were really excited about, because there was no bright red dye. And it's actually more of a pinkish sort of a dye. So it's very pinky red. It became just this huge commercial success. And the Spaniards defended the secret of where they got this color for a really long time. And the British redcoats were probably really more the pinkish sort of fuchsia redcoats. They weren't really that red. They were considerably more pink because they were dyed with cochineal.
Oh.
But it does not make a good story to have Paul Revere riding around yelling, "The pink coats are coming." That's no good. So it's actually been eaten by humans for a long time and used by humans for a long time. And it's also a source of red dye that can be harvested sustainably. The majority of red dyes in our food right now are made from petroleum or coal tar.
So the bugs are actually a much better option.
The bugs are a step up.
And they're edible.
And so in terms of being sustainable, they're an improvement. But there's also, it's a really important way for rural people in Central and South America to have a source of income. And there's actually some data that suggests that cochineal production is related to increased reading rates in the community and increased status of women in the community.
Wow.
So in terms of what Starbucks likes to do of having a nice sustainable supply chain, it's actually pretty consistent for them to have made this change away from coal tar to something that can be sustainably sourced and supports native peoples.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I'd rather eat bug than coal.
Well, it's really more essence of bug.
Well, and it's essence of bug. Ode to the bug.
The insects themselves are kind of like, I kind of describe them as plant pimples. And if their closest relative that most people know about is a mealybug.
Oh.
And so it's sort of like that. It's if you took Jabba the Hutt and made them about the size of a lentil, that would be what they look like.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And if that didn't blow your mind,
more like a grub.
Yeah. Well, except that honestly, they're a big bag of juice.
Yeah. Okay.
So what you do is you smash the bag of juice and you release all that pigment, and then you collect the pigment through a filtration process. So there's really no bug pieces left. It's pretty well distilled down to just the dye itself by the time it goes into food.
And that's just the strawberry frappuccino then?
The color of it,
yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So but what Starbucks did that made everybody upset, and in this case I think people were right to be upset, was that they didn't tell anybody that's what they did. And so folks who are vegan or who have dietary restrictions were really angry that they were not informed about what they were putting in their body. And so in general, I think we should all be able to say, yeah, this is what I'm eating.
Well, there's a thing though. See, I used to work on a farm, and even if you're a vegan, you eat bugs. I'm sorry.
Oh yes, I know. I agree. Well, and that's why the people who are saying, insects in my food, those are the folks that I'm saying, you really need to get over that and get a grip.
Yes.
Because, they are in your food, and they're allowed in your food. And that actually kind of takes us to chocolate.
Yeah. You said something about chocolate, which, I
Right.
have a bag of right here, because, it's that pagan holiday of rabbits and, eggs and things.
That's true. Yes, that's very true. There is almost certainly chocolate in both your coffee, chocolate. Well, there is chocolate in your chocolate, derp.
Well, I'd hope.
But there are almost certainly pieces of insects in with your coffee beans and your chocolate, because it's a processed food. And that's honestly why they're putting a dye in the frappuccinos. It's a processed food. And anytime you have a food that's been processed, there's going to be stuff in it that you may not necessarily want to be there. That's the price that we pay for having things that are really convenient and ready to eat all the time. So in chocolate, the legal limit is 60 or more insect fragments per 100 grams. Although 100 grams of chocolate is a fair amount of chocolate, but still, they're going to be in there.
Here's the thing, though. I've traveled to, China and such.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people actually, for snacks, eat bugs.
Oh, absolutely. They're delicious.
There's a whole candy in Beijing called Jump Tromp that's chocolate-covered grasshopper. So,
honestly, most of the time they're better without the chocolate.
See, I got to eat some form of roach when I was in college for some, class I took. So it didn't taste bad. It wasn't something I would eat, for fun. But,
Yeah, the reality is that roughly 60 to 70% of the world eats insects as a food on a regular basis.
On purpose.
On purpose.
Yeah.
Right, because they taste good, because they are super high in protein. They're a very sustainable food.
Oh, yeah.
So they don't take a lot of water to rear, they don't take a lot of resources to rear, and they have an incredibly high conversion efficiency. And by conversion efficiency, I mean what I put in a cow, say. Of all the food I put in a cow, about 80% of it ends up behind the cow in a big steaming pile. Of all that food that you put in a cow, 80% of it, it's not able to process and convert into meat or milk or whatever useful product that we want. On the other hand, for an insect, their conversion efficiency is actually below 50%. So half or more for some of them of what I put in it actually converts into eatable meat that is very high protein and also doesn't have cholesterol.
Yeah.
So in terms of something that is sustainable and that a small farmer can sustain, they're definitely a superior animal. It's really more the issue of acceptability in the Western world anyway, because it's really the West that have this hang up. So obviously you mentioned Asia. It's very common for people to eat insects in Asia, also in South America and Central America.
Yeah.
And so there are many places in Mexico where you can go and you can get all sorts of fresh insects made into various dishes. So chapulines is one that's very common.
Bug on stick.
Actually, it's usually more on a tortilla, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm in China. I remember walking down the rows of street vendors, and they had lots of bugs on sticks. You could buy.
Yeah, it's like a kebab.
Yeah. And they were tempting because there's so many of them, and some of them are quite colorful.
Well, they're delicious. I mean, personally, my favorite insect dish is curried grasshoppers. And I find that a lot of insects have a nutty taste. And so they go really well in a lot of dishes. One of the most popular things I've ever cooked was I actually substituted, what was that? It was roasted crickets for pine nuts in pesto.
Oh.
There's a huge, we haven't even begun to talk about some of the other insects that show up in our foods all the time that, obviously there are things that are in there by accident when we're talking about chocolate, but another insect that's used a lot is shellac.
Oh, yeah.
So if you've ever had, well, actually, I better not name brands because then who knows what kind of trouble I'll get into, but certainly at one time it was used in Skittles.
Oh, yeah, the coating.
Right. It's called confectioner's glaze or candy glaze. And that almost always is a very polite way of saying it's made from shellac, which is another kind of scale insect, just like the cochineal. And except this is what they make is this really shiny, waxy covering.
So then you make wood look good.
Well, wood, or it's used in hairspray a lot. It makes your things like sweet candies very shiny and makes them last longer. It's used in mascara, actually, a fair amount. And also, I know, because I've seen it on the ingredients, that a lot of enteric-coated aspirins or pills use it as the covering.
I see. Yeah, it makes sense.
It's sort of like cochineal. It's a fairly non-reactive biological product that you could put on things that makes them be digested slowly.
And it's really, really cheap.
It's reasonably cheap. Actually, cochineal is not that cheap. And if you compare it to something that you can mass produce, because for both of these, there's a fair amount of human labor involved to collect either shellac or cochineal. But on the other hand, it's a great thing because what you're doing is increasing the cash flow into rural communities that may be very disconnected from the regular economic commerce of their country. So both in Asia and Central America, these two insects are ways for communities to make some money.
There's something people don't think about at all, the industry around insects.
Mm-hmm. And everything that we consume, if we didn't grow it ourselves, then what are the ethical costs of that food? you can focus on the animals that you're consuming, what kind of life do they have, but also the people that are harvesting crops, if you're eating lettuce, or people who are processing the foods. So trying to have a supply chain, basically, for your diet is actually pretty difficult, and it's not an easy thing to do.
A lot of people don't think about all those things sometimes. So you had to think about the mantis. We had to think about frappuccinos and the bugs. Any other fun questions about bugs?
I had somebody ask me why they were so afraid of spiders, and I honestly don't have an answer. Other than to say, a lot like what we're willing to eat, it has to do with things that you do as a kid. So there are foods that we think are normal and acceptable here in the West, and then we look down on what other people do, and there are a lot of people that have an experience as a kid, whether it's a really scary experience with a spider. More often what I find is it's kids that have parents that are afraid of spiders grow up to be kids that are afraid of spiders. And so it's really the adults that are around you teach you what to be afraid of. And what you learn as a kid is really hard to let go of.
Yeah.
And so starting with, my advice to get over it would be start with adorable little jumping spiders that are fuzzy and tiny. I mean, they're like really, really tiny. They're smaller sometimes than my pinky fingernail. But when you look at them up close, they have adorable little faces and kind of spiky, punky haircuts. So they're good to start with. And if you start by looking at pictures, and if you get to the point where you can look at the picture and not go, that's progress.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right.
Those were all the questions I got.
So we need more questions then.
Yes.
So keep them coming, because obviously we had some good ones.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much again for coming on.
Okay, you too.
Well, I bet some of you will never think about the color red or pink in your drinks the same way now. Some of you might have heard about or read some of the cool content on the new critical thought blog, The Odds Must Be Crazy. Or if you were a fan of George Hrab and listened to his great podcast, I'm sure you have at least heard of it before. Our next guests are the creators and folks who run the content over there at The Odds Must Be Crazy. When I first learned of the site, I even decided to write my own story for them about my strange and slightly creepy story, which involved my best friend from way back when I was about 11 years old, and my much newer friend, Phil Plait, the bad astronomer. Since there might be some of you who have never heard of the site or seen its contents, I set up a discussion between myself and the folks who gave birth to that resource. So we have a couple people who have done something pretty cool that's been getting a little bit of traction lately. I know that George Hrab talked about your project on his podcast recently, and I thought it was great. I actually submitted to it, and I'll let you guys tell everybody who you are.
Well, hello, I'm Jarrett Kaufman.
I'm Wendy Hughes.
And we're both with the Independent Investigations Group in Los Angeles. Actually, we're both steering members of the IIG.
Steering committee members.
Yes, yeah. So that's how we met each other, was our involvement in the Independent Investigations Group. And actually, it was very early on that Wendy started talking about this, at this time, this little side project she was working on that she wasn't getting much traction on, but I picked up on.
I know, and I had an old-fashioned approach to it. I thought we had a Skeptic Camp, our version of Skeptic Camp, which was really our version of brainstorming for new investigations. And I wanted to suggest an investigation into coincidences as the foundation of superstition. And I thought, well, we'll just gather some coincidence stories and write an article. But Jarrett was listening, and he's much more tech savvy than I am. And he had a whole different idea to have it go viral, and I had to say, what does that mean?
Well, I heard her base idea, and it sounded interesting to me, because we've all had some sort of history in dealing with coincidences as a foundation to believing maybe there's something more, or believing we have ESP. I mean, as a kid, I can't count the number of times I thought of someone and the phone rang, or I looked at the phone and it rang, and oh my gosh, I have ESP. That's kind of just what you jump to, especially if you don't have the full-on critical thinking. But it goes much more advanced and involved than that. So, and Wendy had just started collecting stories from within our group. And I was thinking one day, realistically, I've got a lot of favorite websites that deal with user-submitted content, things like notalwaysright.com or CakeRex or
She Thought.
She Thought's a whole different story, because that's more creating editorials on our community. But the idea with this was, people submitting funny stories or goofy examples of something that happened in life that people are going to laugh at or just be entertained by. And so the idea there is simply there's at that base level nothing, no educational value in theory. You're just entertained. And those sites do really well because people laugh at them. They share them on Facebook. They share them on Twitter, Google+, whatever. And every once in a while, one of them gets really popular and gets shared all over the place. I thought, it'd be interesting to use that principle with this coincidence investigation, combining both having a much wider range of people to submit stories to us, so we could learn a lot more than from our relatively small group. I mean, we've still got a lot of members, but still, we could branch out to the world, and it would give us the opportunity to share these stories. And that's where I started to realize it would also give us an opportunity for kind of a wedge strategy for critical thinking. Yeah.
Because we figured if we could somehow add content that explains coincidences, then people reading it for entertainment would also be getting kind of a subtle form of education about statistics, probability,
cognitive biases, various things that in our community, in the skeptical community, we almost take for granted by now. I mean, most of us are pretty familiar with things like confirmation bias, the laws of large numbers. Those are almost old hat for us. But for the rest of the world, you realize constantly, I mean, just look at the Mega Millions lottery that we just went through recently, and all of the comments about people making all these little efforts to improve their chances without really any remote comprehension of what they're dealing with. These are concepts that confuse everybody. And realistically, many of these concepts confuse us too, even if we understand them. They're not easy to grasp. And we all fall into the same traps of believing there's something more. And so in this case, we realized, okay, we have an opportunity here to tell these stories without putting them down. That was what was really important to me from the beginning, was we didn't want to talk down to our submitters or readers or ridicule them for finding these stories interesting, because they are interesting.
They are interesting.
Yeah.
I'm still amused and amazed. I love them.
Yeah, so we get a lot of really cool stories from people, and now that the site's live and has been actively getting hits and getting search hits, that's a really cool thing, is because our stories are so widely varied, we're getting a lot of people coming to our site searching for things that have nothing to do with skepticism, nothing to do with us, but because something they are interested in is mentioned in one of our stories, they find us. And then according to our analytics result, they're spending a lot of time on our site once they find us reading stories. So it's working. But we're getting a wide range of submissions from people outside our community now, and some very, very cool stuff that it's really worth checking out the site and reading to see some of these stories. But they're fascinating to us, so there's no question that they're fascinating to people outside of our community. And so now what we're starting to do, and this was always the goal, was inject a little bit of critical thought into them. We've got editorial comments underneath each story where sometimes I just, added some funny quips and we move on, especially if they're submitted by someone within our group.
I know, but then you also have a way of making them amusing, because the one with the squirrel movie was hilarious.
Yes. Yeah, so someone submitted a very funny story of riding a bicycle and literally having a squirrel fall on their head.
Oh.
Yes, yes, and of course it's a hilarious image, obviously, mentally, as even the person pointed out. I mean, you see the amazing dexterity of squirrels and the way they can jump from tree to tree without problem. So the odds of a squirrel managing to fail one of its jumps, based on what we see, is pretty small already, or at least appears to be, and then landing on its head in the process. And so, in that case, I ended up adding in a quick little YouTube video, an old favorite of mine, of the squirrel that got drunk on fermented pumpkins. So we try to, again, add in humor and personality wherever possible, because this is supposed to be entertaining. But on some of the stories, instead, the editorial comment underneath it will lean toward trying to explain some of the principles behind the story, or what people might not have thought of. And then, more advanced than that, we have actual full-on editorials submit to us. I mean, we've had Mark Edward submit to us. Mark's also on the steering committee with us in the IIG, and well-known mentalist. Barbara Drescher has written a story, an editorial for us. Kylie Sturgis. Who am I missing who's written editorials for us? Off the top of my head, I'm blanking right now. But anyway, so we've had those editorial submissions, and we've got more in the works. Jim Underdown is going to be submitting something for us that's going to be coming out soon and going pretty well. So it's really exciting, because our own community is getting excited about it. And we're hoping to branch out. Realistically, anyone who thinks that they've got a good slant on a topic that's educational. I mean, our most recent one from Barbara Drescher was all about the Monty Hall problem, which is a classic example of where statistics and probability confuse people, no matter how simple it should be.
I love that one.
I loved it too, and she told us that she submitted correction to it, that she, even after she had given it to us, clarified something in her own head. And she'd been an educator for years, and it's amazing. You read that, and all of a sudden you understand what was going on.
Absolutely, yeah. And for anyone not familiar, I mean, the basic breakdown of the classic problem is the classic game show, Let's Make a Deal. Monty Hall would bring someone up on stage, and one of the many tricks in the show would be 3 doors on stage, and the contestant would pick one of the doors. And typically, there's a car behind one of the 3 doors. The contestant doesn't know what's what, picks one of the doors. Monty Hall then reveals one of the doors the contestant didn't pick, and behind it is something silly like a goat. And so now you're down to just 2 doors, the one the contestant picked and the other one that hasn't been revealed. And the contestant is given the opportunity to switch doors. And if the contestant, switches doors or not, to the average person, you would assume, well, that's just a 50-50 chance. What difference does it make for me to switch? I might as well stick with my original. But statistically, it's significant to switch. You actually have a 2 out of 3 chance now of getting it right if you switch. And that doesn't make any sense. And at least to our brains, it makes no sense. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and she said that testing has been done, studies have been done that indicate it's a better, you have better odds if you switch.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is, in her article, she breaks it down in a way that, even though I had been fully convinced by everything I had read and understood it, she finally, in this article, managed to explain it out in a way, and even has a really nice chart on there that finally broke that last bit of confusion in my head, and now I think I fully grasped the concept in a way that I didn't before. So I was really excited to get that submission from her. And we're going to have other editorials. One we want to jump on is the birthday problem, which is a fun one. If you get, I think it's 23 people in a room together, the odds are better than 50% that 2 of them have the same birthday.
Yeah.
Right. There's an increasing number of people in the room increases the odds
by ridiculous amounts.
Yeah. It never gets to 100%, but close.
Yeah. So, well, I guess once you get 366 people, 367. So, but yeah. So those are examples of things we want to touch on, and then just cognitive biases, the things that convince our brains that something's going on that's not. Sometimes these coincidences are so much simpler than what's written out. When you read it like these stories are written, you think there's a much bigger concept going on. But when you start breaking down the individual elements, you start realizing there's more going on than you thought that almost guarantees the events.
Well, that's not to say that there were some stories that we talked over with Barbara that she said,
there's no way for me to calculate this. This is just crazy.
Well, it's funny because I talked to Phil Plait when he came out with his latest book, The Death from the Skies, and I'm not sure it made it to the interview, but we talked with him about the fact that was his problem, trying to come up with the odds and all the stuff in the book he had the odds for, and it took him a long time to figure that out, because what are the odds that is the Earth going to be destroyed by all these different things, and he had to come up with the odds for all that stuff, and that was his big problem too.
And I found it interesting with his, the ones that are essentially guaranteed, versus the ones where, the numbers are ridiculous and mean nothing to us, and of course then there's the comparison. Okay, well, what are the odds of you dying this way versus the odds of the Earth?
Yeah,
it's complicated.
And he had to put things in there. And he had to relate it to things that people would understand, like, things he put in there, like, okay, your odds of getting killed by a shark are greater.
Right.
And
yes,
something that people kind of in general, like, don't worry about. So why would you worry? Don't worry about it,
Yeah, comparing to something real world that people can grasp and say, okay, well, that just never happens to anybody I know, which is anecdotal and silly, but still it helps. It helps give some comparison.
Yeah. Well, people are usually, humans are very, very bad at numbers. I mean, there's a giant city in the desert that makes lots of money, has giant hotels in it that shouldn't be there at all, but there's only reason why. We're all bad at numbers.
And we go there every year to talk about how bad we are at numbers.
Yes.
TAM.
Well, it's a really great place to do that, actually.
It really is. I can't imagine the casinos do as well while we're in town.
Oh, trust me, there's a lot more people than us there.
That's true.
So you have the site is The Odds Must Be Crazy. I'm not sure we actually said that yet.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, no, the website is theoddsmustbecrazy.com. And if you go there, you can follow us on Facebook and Google Plus and Twitter, and we've even got a YouTube channel, although we don't have much up there yet. We've got a couple videos, and we want to add more of that type of content.
Very cool.
We really want to branch out into a lot more methods of distributing our story.
Yeah, we launched 1 year ago. Oh no, not a year
Almost
ago.
a year
yet.
ago, yeah.
Almost a year ago.
TAM 9.
At TAM 9, and we just had a few stories, or by comparison with now, from mostly people we know, and Jarrett managed to, put the site together with help from one of our dear friends, Ross Blotcher.
Yes.
From
Ross,
the IIG.
Yeah, Ross is a fantastic artist, and so our great logo, which I love, is courtesy of him.
And he's part of the Oh No, Ross and Carrie podcast.
That's right. That's the Ross.
That's the Ross.
The Ross.
And he's a commercial artist as well. And I was sitting next to him while he was drawing the picture of the dice to be the D's and odds.
Yeah.
And it was just perfect.
Yeah, he did. He really gave us that final piece that we needed to feel like we had a complete site to launch.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it had to do with us being on the way to Las Vegas.
Yes.
Well, it's Vegas about odds, so it makes sense to me.
Exactly.
So there's another reason why I have you on as well.
Well, we will be making our podcasting debut soon. Thanks to your interest in our site, we will soon be making a debut as a regular feature on Skepticality.
Yeah, and I feature some stories from people that have submitted and some things about the stories people have submitted, like the editorial stuff you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what we're hoping to do here is basically down the line we'll actually be debuting stories on Skepticality. We feel like that would be a fun way to highlight some of the favorite new submissions we get. We'll go ahead and read the story and then make some comments about it. Again, Barbara Drescher is going to be helping us out with stats where they're appropriate, or her own bent on what aspects weren't taken into account in the story, and and help adjust how we think about it. So we'll go ahead and share some of those thoughts on it. And then our comment threads are always wide open on these stories, and we really get some good feedback from people on analyzing them. So we want this to be a great outlet where we'll debut a story on the podcast, put it up on the website the same day, and people can come and discuss it, and we can see if we can learn something more from the story. That'll be interesting.
Most of the stories that you read on The Odds Must Be Crazy are things that you either know somebody had something like that happen or it's happened to you in some way. So it's a very tangible way to know that critical thought is pretty much everywhere.
Yes.
Right, and the foundation of it as being an exploration of of coincidence as one of the foundations of superstition. It's narrow but ubiquitous. I think there are some people that are ultra sensitive to coincidences around them, and some people that are a little more oblivious. But one of our friends, Brian Hart, who's also on the steering committee and has contributed many stories to The Odds Must Be Crazy, he said the more you think about it, the more you are conscious of it, the more you notice it happening.
Absolutely, and I see the little ones now that I hadn't picked up on before. That's one thing we did with the site too, is we've got a hashtag on Twitter, pound TOMBC, our initials, and if you tweet something and put that hashtag in it, it ends up right on the sidebar of our site. So it's a really handy way to throw out those really little quick ones. And those kinds of things happen. You don't necessarily think to send a story about it, but I just had one a couple days ago. I've got an alarm clock on my phone that it forces me to do advanced math problems to snooze the alarm clock. It's a way to help wake me up a little bit. And after my initial snooze, my brain was suddenly stuck in a mode where it was making up math problems. And I settled on a sum of one of the math problems of 823. And then the alarm clock went off. I looked at the clock, and it was 8:23 a.m. So I don't know if there was something subconscious going on there. My brain was doing some tracking of time, and that's where it came from, or what. But those are the little ones that you can just throw out there in a little tweet. But they show up more, because I was thinking about that. When I saw that, it meant more to me now that we're actually actively tracking these things on the site. And so, yeah, people are more aware than ever, and we feel like we hope this is going to spread out there. The term "the odds must be crazy" throughout our entire group is now its own little meme. I mean, we say it constantly when anyone points out something coincidental, and now it sounds like George Robb is starting to use it in context, but not even related to us anymore, which is wonderful. We'd love for this term to just kind of spread.
Wow, it's a good one to say, because it is a really generic way to say something very skeptical around any audience.
Absolutely. So it's a simple phrase that anybody can just chuckle at, and it doesn't offend or upset anyone. It doesn't assume anything, but it does put that perspective into it.
That's very cool. So we'll all be excited and waiting with bated breath for the next episode of Skepticality, where we'll have our first Odds Must Be Crazy segment.
Absolutely, we're excited too.
We're very excited. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I really hope that everybody's been enjoying some of the new and interesting additions to the show. It is all part of our plan to pack more information to each of our episodes so that there's something more for your brain to chew on between the long breaks between each time we meet. Way back at the beginning of this episode, you might have noticed that I didn't play the latest listener submission at the beginning. Well, I was kind of fooling you. I saved it for the end. This episode's science shout-out was submitted by Peter Connold. It is a song all about thinking and reason. The singing is done by his daughter, Rebecca. Peter seems to have done a lot of music about skeptical things. There'll be a link to his website and work in the show notes for this episode, as well as our email, so you can send in your own audio to share with the world. As always, all of it will be at our website, www.skepticality.com.
How can we know the things we know are true? can we go to find the path to truth? How can we test our ideology? Let your reason be your strength and guide. Follow the facts and evidence you find. Don't be afraid to follow the way to anywhere it may lead. Find the joy of thinking critically. Know your bias. Learn your fallacies. It's okay to change what you believe. If you find you're feeling insecure, know it's okay to not know things for sure. When you seek guidance, look at the science. There you will find the key. Just think scientifically. Replace your doubt with curiosity. In this life, we're easily led astray. We get lost in all the shades of gray. If troubles besiege you, reason can lead you to finding a better way. Just think for yourself. Don't just take the word of someone else. Beware the ones who try to sell their version of the truth, who proffer easy answers but can offer you no proof. Like Socrates and Sagan, it's time to take a step and be a better woman and be a better man. Just think, if our thoughts were free, just think how this world could be. Just think.
Want to stay abreast of the latest from Skeptic Magazine and the Skeptic Society? Want cutting-edge skeptical articles delivered straight to your inbox every week? Then subscribe to eSkeptic, the free electronic newsletter of the Skeptic Society. Visit skeptic.com to sign up.